I want to ask you a question. Have you seen the connection MetaZoo's been making to the lore of King Arthur? Welcome back to Cryptid Theory. Tormentic here, and today this one's going to be a little bit of a doozy. I think I found a connection between the lore of King Arthur and the storyline of MetaZoo. I'm definitely going to leave time links in the description in case you need to go back and rewatch some parts of this. I'm going to break it up. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over a little bit of lore about Merlin, Morgan, Mordred, and Arthur themselves before I actually dive into the theory part of it itself. So like I said, strap yourselves in because this one's a lot. Now I want to start this video off saying that there are a ton of different interpretations of the lore of King Arthur. For the most part, I'm going to be using the post-Vulgate cycle to prove this theory to you, but like I just wanted to preface that before we start, that there's a ton of different interpretations of this legend. So the first person I want to talk about is Merlin himself. There's no exact birth date for when Merlin was born. We don't have an actual date exactly when he was born. The story, though, traditionally says that he was born of a mortal virgin woman and he was sired by a demon. That's what gives him his abilities. Now, there's a couple different ways that this story actually breaks away from this point. One version of it, Merlin actually just overcomes his own demons and actually becomes the benevolent person that the story made him out to be. The other one is that he was actually baptized as an infant, and that cured him, in essence, of any of the demonic sense that was going on in his body because of his father being a demon. So later authors start the idea of Merlin actually being a mentor or a teacher to Arthur, and then he disappeared around the time of Arthur's death. Now, it's not entirely known when or how Merlin stopped appearing in the open. There's a couple stories on exactly what happened to him, which I'll go in a second. But there's nothing written down, if you will, per se, that's like, this is exactly what happened to Merlin. His two biggest powers that he was known for were shape-shifting and prophesizing. Shape-shifting, he could shape into pretty much any animal he wanted to, and prophesizing was one of the big things he was well known for, especially in the time of King Arthur. A popular French prose cycle actually describes Merlin as being imprisoned or killed by a former student of his, the Lady of the Lake, often called Nemu or Vivian. There's also a local legend that he was buried inside of the forest of Brocéliande. That's a French forest, very mystical forest, if you will. There's a lot of lore about that being a very mysterious and magical forest, if you will. Merlin had a very few noteworthy students. One of them was Sybil, a mythical medieval queen or princess. Another one was the Lady of the Isle of Avalon, Morgan Le Fay. The wise damsel from the Italian history, Mabon, which is a male wizard, and of course Vivian, who was, again, the Lady of the Lake. He is able to share his magical abilities to his students. He's able to teach them how to use this magic, do these things, but he is not able to share his prophecy abilities. Now, it specifically said share his prophecy abilities, so that tells me that he was able to give his students the ability to transform into other animals, which will come into play later. So the next person I want to talk about is Morgan, or Morgan Le Fay, or Morganna, as we know her here in MetaZoo lore. She is a very powerful enchantress and healer from Arthurian legend. She is the daughter of Igraine and Golois Tintagel. She had two sisters, Mogos and Elaine. Now, her backstory actually kind of starts with Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon. So see, Uther Pendragon was in love with Igraine Tintagel, and of course, Elaine was the wife of Golois. So he plotted to overthrow Golois and basically take his land from him. He attacked his fortress, and so Golois actually went to fight Uther Pendragon at that fortress. Unbeknownst to Golois, though, Uther actually was in cahoots with Merlin. Merlin transformed Uther into looking like Golois, and Uther went and slept with Igraine, conceiving Arthur. Now the thing is, though, is that while the attack on the fortress was going on, Golois actually died. So in the end, Uther still married Igraine. Alright? So here's where it gets a little weird, okay? So like I said, she had two sisters. She had Morgause and Elaine. Now, the Uther Pendragon married off Morgause and married off Elaine, but he sent Morgan to a nunnery because she was the youngest of the three sisters. So Morgan was sent to a nunnery, and she deeply resented Arthur as a product of the lust between Uther and her mother, and she did not like Uther at all because of what Uther did to her father, in essence. At the nunnery, she was introduced to astrology, the dark arts of necromancy, and the skills to become a healer. Now, she was later trained by Merlin himself, and as her abilities started to increase, people started calling her Morgan Le Fay. That's how she got the name. She eventually started to live on the Isle of Avalon as the queen. Morgan was not at first an antagonist in the Arthurian legends, but over time she started to evolve into this big antagonist. She tried many times to thwart Arthur and stop him from being king. She stole Excalibur at one point, including the sheath. The sheath is what allowed Arthur to actually be healed while he was in battle. It allowed him not to be hurt, not to be cut. She once sent an enchantress to present a cloak to Arthur, and Arthur looked at the cloak and was about to take it, and then he was like, wait a minute, why don't you put on the cloak first? And the enchantress was like, oh no, I can't, I'm not worthy, I can't wear this. And he's like, no, put it on before I will accept it. She put it on and immediately erupted into flames. So Morgan was trying to, again, take out Arthur. At one point, like I said, she steals the scabbard and Excalibur. And when she tried, Arthur, she basically is like, here, you can have them back. But she gives Arthur a fake set of the Excalibur and the scabbard. She captured as many of the Knights of the Round Table as she could whenever they got to her domain. And the one that she was obsessed with and she was in love with was Lancelot. She captured Lancelot and held him captive for quite some time, to the point to where he was able to do a lot of these really big, nice, beautiful, elaborate paintings. Well, her and Arthur at one point tried to make amends, and Arthur went to her abode, her castle. And while he was there, she started giving him a tour and started showing him all of these paintings that Lancelot had done while he was captive there. And what it did was it made Arthur realize that the affair, which he knew was going on between his wife Guinevere and Lancelot, he knew that was happening, but he didn't realize how long it had been happening. Because of that, he actually went against Lancelot. Lancelot fled to his stronghold with Guinevere. Arthur went after Lancelot at that point, pretty much to take Guinevere back and also to pretty much avenge his honor, which had been completely destroyed at that point. In doing so, Arthur left Mordred in charge of Camelot, supposedly. It kind of varies on how Mordred actually came to power in Camelot while Arthur was away. And this would actually lead to Arthur's undoing, which we'll get to here in just a bit. Because of her, again, going back to her stealing the scabbard and Excalibur, Arthur didn't have it when it came to the Battle of Camlin. That's one of the reasons why Arthur died in the Battle of Camlin, was because he didn't have the scabbard, because Morgan Le Fay, Morgan, stole it from him years before. She was also the one, ironically though, that took Arthur's body, Arthur himself, before he died, to the Isle of Avalon in order to heal. And that's the thing, is that most of the stories don't have the intention of like, oh, I'm taking him and I'm going to kill him once I get to the Isle of Avalon. Like, no, she legitimately at that point, for some reason, cared for Arthur and wanted to heal him, so she took him back to her magical island. So Mordred's a very interesting character too, and there's two different kind of stories, if you will, for Mordred. One of them is that he is actually the bastard son of Arthur. It didn't really fit with what I was trying to explain here, but the other one really did. It was that he was the son of Queen Morgause and King Lot. So remember, Morgause was the sister to Morgan, so this would have made Mordred Arthur's nephew. Morgan, Morgase, and Elaine are the half-sisters to Arthur, if you remember, because of Uther Pendragon having the son, pretty much, or having the child, if you will, with Igraine. Now, Arthur is told a very cryptic prophecy. This is one of the big differences in post-Vulgate and the Vulgate cycle. So Arthur is told a cryptic prophecy by Merlin about a just-born child that will be Arthur's undoing. Arthur orders pretty much all babies born on that day to be gotten rid of. It doesn't explicitly say anything about getting rid of them, like killing them. It specifically is talking about just getting rid of them. The story I was reading was talking about how all of the babies were put on a boat, and the boat, either by happenstance or by Arthur himself, sank, with all of them perishing. So Arthur thought he was safe. Now, with Mordred, though, however, he was actually saved by a fisherman accidentally, and he was raised by that fisherman until he was the age of 14, when he realized what his true parentage was. Once he realized what his true bloodline was, he started adventuring with his brothers. First as a squire, and then as a knight, and then finally he actually got his own spot at the round table with Arthur himself. In the post-Vulgate cycle, he's known for his murderously violent tendencies, along with his lustful habits. He was not a good person, if you will. A good example of this right here is he stabs Pelinor's son in the back and kills Lamorc, Pelinor's son, with his brothers. One of his brothers, which kills their own mother, Morgase, because she was a love of Lamorak's. So, like, he was not a good person, if you will. Ironically, though, he actually adventures with Lancelot for a very long time, and Lancelot and Mordred become inseparable for a while. Lancelot comes and saves Mordred a couple times during adventures. I mean, they have a very strong connection. Like I said, he becomes a protege of Lancelot, and he doesn't really turn evil, though, until Lancelot and himself are confronted by a random hermit on the street. Now, this hermit actually talks about how both of them, Mordred and Lancelot, will be the undoing of Arthur. Before the hermit can continue the prophecy, though, Mordred, in a fit of rage, murders the hermit right there, and that is what most scholars believe to be the turning point completely of Mordred turning evil. Mordred actually, after hearing the prophecy, tries to harm himself, if you get what I'm saying, but ultimately fails. Then he actually accepts his fate as being one of the ones that's going to be the downfall of King Arthur. Lancelot actually tells Guinevere about this prophecy, and Guinevere doesn't believe him, so that's one of the reasons why Mordred is allowed to stay in Camelot with them. Now, like I was talking about before, once Arthur finds out exactly how long the affair between Guinevere and Lancelot has been going on, he goes after Lancelot, and he takes his main army and he actually goes and attacks Lancelot's main fortress. While he's there doing that, Mordred actually takes control of Camelot, supposedly with a forged letter that was supposedly sent by Arthur to take control of the kingdom. As soon as Arthur actually realizes what is going on, he immediately returns to Camelot to reclaim his throne. A massive battle, the Battle of Camlin, is what takes place, where Arthur actually decapitates Mordred, and Mordred actually fatally wounds Arthur. And that's at the point when Morgan the Fae actually takes Arthur to the Isle of Avalon in order to heal him. Alright, the last one I need to talk about is Arthur himself. Arthur is known as Arthur Pendragon. He is the child of Uther Pendragon and Igraine, the wife of the Duke of Tintagel. Now, we already talked about how Uther and Merlin used the magic in order to basically coerce Igraine into sleeping with Uther, so we're not going to cover that again. But what I didn't tell you in that part was that Merlin told Uther that any child that was born between the two of them doing it, you know what I mean, that child would then belong to Merlin. So when Arthur was born, I believe it was four or 5 days after Arthur was born, he literally was taken by Merlin to be raised by himself somewhere else. His mother never saw him again. When Arthur was very young, he was sent to, like I said, to live with a loyal ally of the king, Sir Ector. No one knew who Arthur's true parentage was. They thought that he was some sort of a bastard child. He wasn't very good care of. The other children in the family made fun of him. They looked down on him. They cast dirt and rocks at him. Like, it was not a good time for Arthur. But about this time, and about a couple years later, Uther Pendragon dies, and it sends the entire kingdom up into turmoil. And the nobles go up to Merlin and are like, all right, look, we need you to do something. We need you to do something that will calm everything down, so this nation, this kingdom, does not fall apart. So that's when Merlin actually takes the stone and the sword, and he actually puts the sword in the stone, and he actually says, he writes on it, "Whoso pulleth the sword from the stone is rightwise king born of all England." Everybody knows the sword and the stone story. Tons of people try it. Nobody can actually get it done. The nation doesn't fall apart. It doesn't erupt into civil war or anything, but it does not get much better, if you get my drift. So, as Arthur is growing up, Merlin introduces himself to the boy. The two of them become friends, and Merlin starts teaching Arthur good morals, good lessons, all sorts of things, trying to teach him to be a just and true leader when the time is for him to become king of England. When Arthur is 15 years old, Merlin actually takes him to the stone, and it's funny because Arthur's is not really his stepbrother, but Sir Ector's son is big, strong, and he goes up, tries to pull up the sword. I mean, that Sword in the Stone, the Disney movie. Can't do it. Arthur goes right up there and just pulls it straight up, making him the true ruler, the true king, if you will, of England. Now we're going to fast forward a couple years to the first time he meets Guinevere, and it is immediately love at first sight. Everyone is rejoiced, everyone is happy about it, except for Merlin. When Merlin hears that Arthur wants to marry Guinevere, Merlin takes Arthur to a misty lake. He explains that on the other side of the mist is the Isle of Avalon, and that beings that live over there are possessed supernatural entities, these powers. They're powers that can be used for good and for evil. Suddenly a beautiful woman emerges from the lake. In her hand she holds a bejeweled and beautiful sword. Merlin then says to Arthur, "If you insist on surrounding yourself with such danger, then you're going to need a powerful weapon to protect yourself. This is Nimue, the Lady of the Lake. This sword is Excalibur. It is the finest strength. It can cut through iron and steel, but the real magic lies in the scabbard. For whoever holds the scabbard shall never die of his wounds. Always keep it by your side. Never let yourself be parted from it." So he gives Excalibur to Arthur because of him meeting Guinevere. I'm not entirely sure what he saw in Guinevere. It might have been again, he had the power of prophecy, so he could potentially have maybe seen what the future would hold between the trio of Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere. That might be why he was like, wait a minute, I'm going to give you something to actually protect yourself. Now, many years pass, and four strangers come up to Camelot. And Arthur turns to Merlin, and he's like, who are these people? And Merlin tells him, 3 of them are your sisters. 2 of them have come to actually make amends, to make peace. The 3rd is Morgan Le Fay. She is here to hurt you. She is evil. The boy is your nephew and will lead to your downfall. Now, this was the point where Arthur actually accepted, if you will, Mordred into Camelot. So the rest of this we've pretty much already covered. That Morgan Le Fay is a big adversary of King Arthur, that Arthur actually accepted Mordred into Camelot. We know that when Arthur went to go make amends with Morgan Le Fay, that's when he saw all the paintings, which actually led him to then go after Lancelot and Guinevere, which then led to Mordred taking over the throne, which then led back to Arthur coming back, and both Mordred and Arthur, in essence, killing each other. Arthur then being transported to the Isle of Avalon. But what does all of this actually really mean? I'm convinced that Morganna, the new theme deck that just came out with Seance, is a direct tie to Morgan Le Fay. The card actually says that she was born in 450 AD, which is right around the time of Arthurian legends. And the flavor text of her card actually reads, "This powerful healer can be just as much of an ally as she can be an enemy. Her often vengeful nature comes as a direct contrast to the fateful king that she helped raise to power." Morganna helping Arthur rise to power. That's Morganna, okay? Morgan Le Fay. Now, I'm still convinced is Merlin. Now, his date of birth is listed as the thousands. It doesn't have an exact date, but he's also, just like Morganna is listed as being the birthplace in Britain. Now, that's big because, again, all of Arthurian lore takes place in England. Now, something that's interesting, though, is that if Merlin was caught or trapped or killed, if you will, inside of any of the places where it's described. Something, especially if he was trapped, when the veil was put in place around 1000 AD or so, the bond, the trap that would have been holding him, if it was on our plane of existence, which the forest and other things would be, that would have vanished, because the magic that was powering it would have disappeared because of being cut off completely, like I believe the veil to be. The veil literally was like putting a bubble around humanity that separated us from the magic. Not just us, but the animals, everything around us was separated from that magic. So if he was being imprisoned by magic, it would make sense that that prison would be gone in essence. So his birth date would be 1000. Again, if Merlin had any sort of reincarnation power as well, if he was killed but then something was put in place to stop him from being able to reincarnate, to heal himself in essence, once the veil was put in place, that would have disappeared as well, and he would have either been able to reincarnate or regenerate. Because again, remember, M is an evergreen caster, meaning that even with the veil in place, he still had limited magical potential. He could still make some things happen. He could still do some stuff. Even with the veil in place, he was that strong of a caster. Another thing to connect all of this to Seance would be the demon that is Merlin's father. What about maybe if that is actually Old Scratch? So Merlin, or M, is literally the son of Old Scratch. It might explain why he's so powerful. Again, we don't know exactly why M or Merlin would have actually gone to the side of good, but that's a very interesting connection if you think about how to tie this into Seance itself. Now this next one is a little crazy. It is my belief that Indrid Cold is actually either Mordred or a descendant of Mordred. The dark hair specifically, and the resemblance in the name. We're not sure actually who trained Indrid Cold either, in the form of casting, but it would make sense to me that maybe he would have trained because of his father being killed. Maybe this is actually, Indrid is one of Mordred's sons who was actually able to escape in secrecy. Because the other thing you have to remember too is that all of this is taking place like easily 400-500 years before the veil is put in place, when magic is being used by everyone. Magic is everywhere. Real magic is everywhere, and it's real. Like anything that there's things that we can't even comprehend right now in MetaZoo that probably were taking place back then, because magic had been used for so long and by so many of these powerful casters. Saying that also means that, according to what I think, Adam is also a descendant of Mordred, because it's still my belief that Indrid and Adam have some sort of connection. Now, an interesting thing too, if you remember about Merlin's, one of his abilities about being able to shapeshift, there's been a running theory running around the community that Adam at some point gets turned into a Gumbaroo. What about if it's not him getting turned into a Gumbaroo, but what if he actually got the ability to shapeshift from M? Because remember, before he went to Quimbley's, M was actually training him. It never fully says in the comic what his abilities were or what he could actually do to full potential, but maybe M actually taught him how to actually transform into animals, and Gumbaroos was just one of the ones that he wanted to do. Because I'm not fully convinced now that he was cursed, if you will, to turn into a Gumbaroo. He might have done it himself. Now, I think the tarot set that just came out as well have some clues in it to tie into this Arthurian lore as well. First off, the Queen of Wands, in my opinion, that is Morgan Le Fay. That is Morganna. That is just a different picture of Morganna than what we actually got from the theme deck. Now, the King of Pentacles, we have assumed was Edgar Casey after looking at it, or potentially Adam. But what about if that's actually Mordred? Like, that would make sense if we're actually basing a lot of this tarot set back in the Arthurian lore time. So, King of Pentacles, Mordred. Queen of Wands would be Morgan. The King of Cups card and the King of Wands, Those two right there, I believe actually to be different depictions of Merlin. Something that's super interesting to me too is if you look at the swords cards, and if you go through 1 through 10, you actually see that there's a progression on there of the baseball bat turning into a sword. Now, who uses a baseball bat in the comics? Sam. It is my belief that Sam is either a reincarnation or somehow a descendant of King Arthur himself. Okay, think about it. Both of them were raised by Merlin, being taught by Merlin. Arthur with Merlin, Sam with M. On top of that, Arthur was being presented as a unifying presence in order to unite all of Britain, and I don't know why I get that same feeling from Sam. Now, again, talking about how the magic existed, like these 400 or 500 years before the veil was put in place, maybe these Arthurian legends actually are small cliff notes, if you will, of larger events. If you actually look at the a couple of the cards from the tarot set, if you start with the Fool, you actually see that it is Sam Sinclair with his baseball bat, and then you slowly make your way through the Page of Swords, the Knight of Pentacles, Knight of Wands, the Knight of Swords, the Knight of Cups, and Justice, and you start seeing an actual story being told of how Sam Sinclair went from this foolish character, if you will, to literally being the name of justice, the emblem of justice, which again would be King Arthur. The other thing too is that, like, we don't know exactly how powerful some of these casters were back in those days, pre-veil. Like, we don't. Interestingly though, one of the crests that Arthur used was a golden dragon. And again, on all of those tarot cards, well, not all of them, but majority of those, as Sam starts aging, starts getting older, more mature, more wise, he has the dragon with him. So that's another connection. That's another big connection, I really thought, to Arthur and Sam. Now, this train of thought also got me thinking about, well, we've been trying to figure out why the veil was actually put in place. Well, King Arthur and the rest, like I said, they pretty much existed about 400 or 500 years before the veil was put in place. Now, when Arthur died and then Merlin was either killed or imprisoned, over the next couple hundred years, that could have led to the state that the veil was needed to be put in place. Something could have risen to power that was basically the reason why, and the whole reason why it rose to power was because Merlin and Arthur weren't there. There are also many prophecies that actually state that King Arthur would rise again, that he was the king that was and the king that will be. It's a very big legend that in the greatest time of need, especially specifically for Great Britain, Arthur would rise again in order to actually unite the people. Well, if we expand on this and we actually say that this time right now, with the dark masses of forcing in the north, when he, like, think when he's in Loveland Castle, every Mothman attacking all of these big cities, there could potentially be, this could be the moment that a unifying force is needed. Someone like King Arthur, someone like Sam. It's super interesting to me how there's so many different parallels between the two. So, quick recap. Morgan Le Fay is Morganna, M is Merlin, Indrid Cold is somehow related to Mordred, and Sam is somehow related to King Arthur. Not entirely sure, to be honest with you, how this actually will impact the overall story. I think this is just small little tiny teases that we've gotten. And to be honest with you, like I said, there's so many different variations of the Arthur lore that they don't have to stick with one specific one. They can pick pieces that they want here or there. Last thing I want to add, though, is that if there is some sort of connection between Edgar Casey and Adam, does that mean that Edgar Casey potentially could be part of that lineage as well, with Mordred and Indrid? But let me know what you think in the comments below. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to all of this. Like I said, I will leave timestamps in the description if you need to go back and actually check more of the information about one of the specific characters before you go up to the end. But I look forward to actually talking with you guys in the comments. But until next time, my name is Termentic, and I hope you have a wonderful night.